So coming from a Christian education background, I'm used to an audience that can only stay with me for a few minutes. So heads up, this is a short sermon. You're welcome for that time back in your day. I had awareness of the story of Esther from my childhood Sunday school days, but it never really stuck with me until I stumbled upon the 2006 film, One Night with the King. The title sounds a little more risque than it really is. The story is pretty true to the Bible. This message isn't about the movie. I just thought it was funny there was a movie about the message, even though Paris isn't here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story of Esther, but let me give you a refresher. Hadassah, known as Esther, is an orphan Jewish teen living with her cousin Mordecai and his family in Persia. When the Persian king Xerxes is in search of a new queen, all the young women in the land are rounded up, basically kidnapped, to participate in a beauty pageant of sorts. Of course, it isn't all. The king finds Esther pleasing, and she is crowned a queen. Of course, it isn't all princess parties and fancy gowns. This is not an ideal marriage, and the king is known for flashes of temper that often resulted in people losing their head. When righteous cousin Mordecai infuriates Haman, a trusted advisor to the king, Haman orchestrates a plot to have all the Jews in Persia killed. Mordecai pleads with Esther to use her position in the palace to save her people. As we heard in the Bible, Esther is reluctant to take a risk that could result in her own death. Eventually, Esther is inspired to step forward. She approaches the king, and the Jewish people are protected. In some retellings of the story, we focus on Esther's beauty and her charm, her shrewd thinking that saves her people. But I find myself drawn to the girl that was plucked out of obscurity and found herself in a time and place where she could make an impact. What can we learn from the story of Esther and Mordecai? For beginners, Esther and Mordecai are faithful children of God. Mordecai has a strong sense of justice as a Jew, and Esther practices the traditions of her father's father's father in praying and fasting. Both of them showed great courage and careful planning, and I think Esther and Mordecai would make excellent disciples at F.C.C. Esther is open to what we might call constructive criticism, and Mordecai is wise enough to know how to motivate. Mordecai has some harsh words for Esther about what it means to fail in this moment, but he also presents Esther with an incredible invitation. Perhaps you are here for just such a time as this. Talk about pumping up someone's ego. So we can take away a few things already: the significance of faith and be open to advice. But what else can we learn from this story? How about following God can mean that we have to sacrifice our own security? 20 years ago, I thought I had it figured out. I attended mission trips every summer, I joined the International Student Organization, and I supported the new LBGT group opening on campus. I thought I was worldly. After all, I had been to over half of the continental United States and all the way to Canada. And I was a progressive Christian. I was the poster child for individual and social responsibility. Mother Teresa would have been impressed with my empathy for those less fortunate. Now I find myself overwhelmed by the onslaught of hate and violence, constant fear, and persistent injustice that floods our social media and cable news. I'm at a loss. Where do we begin to change the world? No longer do I feel brave enough to stand up to these oppressors. I'm not trained for that kind of stuff. I have a career and a home and a family. I don't think I'm the right person to rock the boat. The food banks and soup kitchens are overwhelmed by the working poor, this new social class where you do everything right and you're still coming up short. I feel really bad. I feel really bad. But I don't know what to do. I think there's paperwork involved, and I just think there's a lot of good people around here. Somebody else can take care of that. But you know what? There's actually something about that way of thinking in this morning's scripture. Mordecai tells Esther that relief and deliverance might come from somewhere else. But what will she lose by disregarding her call in this moment? If you're following along, we have learned that we need to keep our faith strong by practice, be open to new perspectives, and listen to what is calling at your heart now, so that we are prepared to make an impact. But what does this look like? Will we be able to recognize the opportunity? God put us in certain circumstances to benefit or even rescue others. Are you a carrot, an egg, or coffee? Our education as a child of God is ongoing through the experiences we have. Our hot water moments are shaping us. God is hoping that we will be like the coffee and change the space around us. Sometimes God will have to close a door in order to force us out the window, because God needs us to be on the other side of that window. Paul reminded the Philippians of just that. Wholeness of life does not come from material things or only those happy times. Our joy can only be realized by accepting God is in control. When we look back at Esther, Mordecai, and Paul, we recognize the long tradition God has of giving our experiences meaning. Let me say that I'm not trying to minimize those upheavals and losses that hurt deep down in your soul. Sometimes we wonder if we will ever feel peace again. But please hear, God knows that hurt. God is present with you. You have already been crowned a child of God, no need for pageants. The Creator, the great Redeemer, sees you and she believes in you. She believes in your resilience. Which leads me to my next point. God uses powerless people in his powerful things. You can do all things through the strength that comes from God alone. I got a thing for princesses, as many people know. I can identify with the heroine of just about every fairy tale, and Esther's story has the framework for a great fairy tale. Pathetic heroine facing tragedy, meets a king who digs her and makes her a queen. He rubber stamps the genocide of her people, and they all live happily ever after. Okay, so maybe it's not the perfect fairy tale. The good news is the story was changed when one woman stepped forward. And you know what? She still lived happily ever after. Our happily ever after is what rises up from that hot water. When we practice our faith through all the elements of discipleship, including worship and prayer and service, we are made stronger than the tough times. And when we are empowered by that strength, we can courageously step forward. The thing about being courageous is it comes in big and little moments. As a member of church council, a ministry chair, and a member of this congregation, I've had the opportunity to participate in the R&R process. I have to tell you, honestly, I'm struggling with all this change. But I hear an intent to be more deliberate in our ministries. I think you're going to hear us talk about evaluating the success of our programs, including timelines. This might mean we're going to have to let go of some of the things we do. We'll have to be courageous in our faith that God will fill that space with something new and re-energized. I think you're going to hear about some fresh and exciting outreach opportunities, drawing on the gifts and experience of this congregation. You remember that toddler toy that was the different shapes and you could stick them in the different holes that were the same shape? I want to tell you, my friend, bring your star-shaped self right here because I have a star-shaped hole for you. If you're a square, I have a spot for squares. If you're as complex as 3 sides or 5 sides or a classic circle, this congregation has a place for you. You were born, shaped, God-gifted, and God-fortified for something that is calling on your heart right now. We can sit and wait for God's invitation to participate in this relationship. I understand she sometimes talks through burning bushes, so maybe we'll each get one of those messages. Or we can feel that deep, higher calling to serve where God has already led us. It may not be as big a story as Esther or Paul, but it will not be any less significant because you were born for this. Thank you.